To support our discussions with the world's leading thinkers, please see the video description or visit eism.eu/support. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to A Theory of Everything. I'm Luis Razzo, the Executive Director of the European Institute of Science and Management and host of this channel. Today we have the privilege of talking to Philip Goff, an increasingly influential professor of philosophy at one of the most prestigious schools in the UK, Durham University. Professor, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Luis. Thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Me too. So you've been nice enough to accept my invitation to talk about an impressive and important book that you've written called Why? The Purpose of the Universe. In my opinion, your book deserves to be carefully read and studied by everybody, but especially by serious thinkers. Before I give my reasons for believing this, I'd like to ask you to set aside all modesty and tell listeners what makes this book unique and why they should read it. And when you're done, if it's okay, I'd like to share my reasons. And I think there might be some overlap, but I think there's some reasons that you haven't quite captured yet. So please.
Excellent. That sounds intriguing. Yeah, well, it's been quite a long journey coming to writing this book, actually. I think 5 years ago, if you told me I would be writing this book, I wouldn't have believed you. But I've really just changed my mind a lot through following the evidence and the arguments as they seem to be. I think so many people in the West, at least, feel they have to fit into the dichotomy of either you believe in the God of traditional Western religion or you're a secular atheist. You know, as I often say, it's like you've got to pick your sides. Is it Richard Dawkins or the Pope? You know, whose side are you on? And I was raised Catholic, actually, but decided I didn't believe in God when I was 14 and was quite happily in Team Secular Atheist for over 20 years. But just through my own philosophical scientific research, I've come to think that both of these standard Western worldviews are inadequate. Both of them have things they can't explain about reality. And where I've come to think the evidence points is towards what I call cosmic purpose. That is to say, some kind of goal-directedness at the fundamental level of reality, but one existing in the absence of the traditional God. So that's what I'm arguing for in this book, and trying to explore the implications, if any, for human meaning and purpose. So yeah, I guess in my previous work, maybe I've had some success in getting people to think again about certain popular views and maybe look at them in a different way and come to think that they're not as implausible as they might first have seemed at first sight. And I'm hoping to do the same with this book on cosmic purpose, but we'll see how people respond.
Well, fantastic. This goal-directed approach to science and to philosophy, I think is incredibly rich and incredibly important. And in the same spirit of this goal-directed approach, one of the reasons I think that your book is exceptionally important for the human species at this moment is precisely because you make a connection between these deep philosophical and even scientific questions and something very concrete, which is taxation. And you actually end the book on this very practical, you bring these things down to earth. And if there's anything the planet needs at the moment is to move away from this jargon-filled academic, I'm not sure what word to use, but to bring it down to earth and make it practical and real. And the fact that you do this and you've had the courage to do this, I think is is praiseworthy, and I think it's an important move that you're making. That's on the one hand, this connection between. So can you say a couple of words before I give my second reason?
Oh, thank you very much. That's very kind. Yeah, so a lot of people remarked on the postscript on taxation. Is taxation theft? I mean, there's all sorts of things going on in this book. I mean, the reason actually, well, I mean, so most of the book is just the cold-blooded scientific and philosophical case for cosmic purpose. But the first and last chapters are discussing possible implications for human meaning and what it might be to live out what I call cosmic purposivism. That is to say, living in hope of cosmic purpose, of a greater purpose to reality. And of course, when I spell that out, I'm going to be fitting in my own ethical, political views. But the final chapter, and to an extent the first chapter, are very much in the spirit of raising possibilities, raising challenges, not so much definitively or dogmatically saying, this is the only way to live a meaningful life. And so, I hope people with, say, different political opinions from me could be challenged by what I say. That's how you strengthen your own positions, through being challenged by the best opposition. Or also to, swap in their own political or ethical views and how they would think about these issues or about cosmic purposivism. But the reason this became a postscript in its own right on taxation, you might think a bit odd in a book on cosmic purpose, was when I talked about politics, the editor of the book, brilliant editor Peter Monsheloff, who's the philosophy guy at Oxford University Press, who's just announced his retirement. So I'm very proud, very pleased I managed to work with him before he retired. And he thought the brief remarks I'd said on taxation looked a bit thin. He worried it might sound a bit like people talking in a pub or something. So he made me add, well, it's actually a reprint of an article I wrote on the question of whether taxation is theft for Aeon magazine. So I reprinted it there. But part of what, I'm hoping these questions of spirituality and the meaning of existence, I think, should be connected to questions of politics and what the good society looks like and political struggle. And I try to suggest that, well, I don't know how much to get into the details of this, but I think I also defend a conception of spiritual progress, which was actually an extract that was reprinted in the Wall Street Journal, if people read the Wall Street Journal, which is to do with seeing through conditioned ways of seeing the world. So that's a general theory I have of one way of thinking about spiritual progress. And I connect that to politics and taxation because I think many of the things that hold up political progress are rooted in these conditioned ways of seeing reality. For example, attaching a certain sanctity and sense of naturalness to the contingent property rights we happen to have in our society, which of course I believe are social constructions that are different in times and different places, and we could in principle mold to shape the kind of society we want, these contingent structures of property rights. But it's very natural for citizens to think, no, it's mine. That's, if you've ever, I'm raising young kids at the moment. One of the first things they say, mine, so I think it's very natural for people to think, oh, these property rights they happen to have in this contingent economic system are their natural sacred rights and no one's going to change them, and the tax person is stealing their money. And so I'm trying to seeing through those conditioned ways of seeing reality as part of both political struggle and spiritual progress. That's the idea anyway.
Well, fantastic. Well, this idea of people having different takes or different interpretations on social issues, economic issues, and science issues reminds me of an analogy that I like to propose. And if it's okay, I'd like to anchor the rest of our conversation on this analogy. And I'll use the image in your book of Jesus sometimes appearing in toast, and how that is sometimes how that randomness can sometimes be interpreted as Jesus. So this concept of, okay, I see in toast, I see a certain figure, it looks like Jesus. Another person might say, well, that looks more like Santa Claus. And another person might say, no, 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 I see a gremlin. So you have different interpretations of one single objective reality, or apparently one objective reality, or different interpretations of reality. Would you agree that if humanity, or if a group of persons is in a dire situation, and if they don't get out of that situation, they're likely to die, but they can get out of that situation if they come up with the right interpretation of what that toast, what's represented in that toast? Let's say the password is whatever's in that toast, and the password is one of those images and not any of the other images. Would you agree that it makes sense that all of those interpretations are acceptable and they're perfectly viable, right? Who am I to say that it's not Santa Claus if another person sees it as Santa Claus? But the correct, or the most preferable interpretation, would be that which gets that group or humanity itself out of danger. Does that seem like a logical proposition?
That's a very interesting question to pose. So yeah, I mean, just to be clear for viewers and listeners who haven't read the book, the Jesus in toast discussion is not something I'm actually saying, you know, Jesus is actually communicating through toast. It was, I guess, supposed to be an example of the times in which we're happy to think something a little bit improbable is just chance. It's just a coincidence. And when the burn mark in toast happens to be a bit uncannily like the image of Jesus, or I guess the image of Jesus in Western art or something. But it's not that improbable. It's a little bit improbable, which is why it amuses us, but it's not that improbable. And so we're happy to think it's chance. But of course, this has its limits. Here's an example that's not from the book, but you know, let's say bank robbers break into a bank and they get the 10-digit combination right in 10 seconds flat for the safe. And here's two hypotheses. One, they had inside information that told them the combination, so that's how they knew it. Or second hypothesis, they just guessed it. They just guessed it and they got it right first time. I think in that situation, it would not be rational to accept the second hypothesis. If we're comparing those two hypotheses, I'd say the only rational thing to go for, it's possible they just guessed it, but it's so improbable that the more rational alternative is the former hypothesis. And I think we know quite well how to understand this in terms of what we call Bayes' theorem, our standard mathematical way of analyzing probability, and how probability works in evidential support, in how evidence can support a hypothesis. And this is all what I bring to bear in trying to make this case for cosmic purpose. So coming to answer your question, firstly, look, there is a great deal of uncertainty. I'm a philosopher, and we disagree about all kinds of things, and quite rightly so, because there is a lot in the human situation that is highly uncertain and highly debatable. But I don't think I want to wholly go along with what you've just said, the pragmatist view that we should look for correctness in what works or what helps us or something. I suppose I am a bit maybe old-fashioned in thinking reason and evidence can, in principle, be objectively evaluated. And most of the book, this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make what I believe to be the objective evaluation. And of course, it's very difficult because we've got all sorts of biases at play. We're very well trained in the West to be aware of religious biases. I think we're a little bit less aware of secular biases, of the biases that are implicit in our standard scientific assumptions. And I personally think that clouds a lot of what people think in this area of cosmic purpose, because it sort of feels weird. Maybe a little bit like in the 16th century, it felt the Copernican idea that the Earth it goes around the sun rather than the other way around. It felt weird. And then we nowadays think, oh, those stupid religious people, why didn't they just follow the evidence? But I think every generation has those views that they almost can't see beyond. And I think a lot of that sort of bias is stopping people thinking, in my view, clearly about cosmic purpose. So, yeah, so I think, I do think I'm old-fashioned in the sense of thinking we can try to objectively evaluate these things with due humility, that others reach a different opinion and we try and understand where they're coming from, and we're not totally sure our own view is right, even though we may take ourselves to have a pretty good justified case. Very, very finally, I don't want to entirely dismiss what you're saying, and I think philosophers don't come back enough to the real practical issues. And well, I have this little thought experiment from the co-host of my podcast and YouTube channel, Mind Chat, which I do with a philosopher who has the polar opposite opinion to me. And he likes to pose the truth demon thought experiment, where you imagine some kind of demon asks you a philosophical question, and if you get the answer wrong, the demon will send you to hell for eternity for getting the answer wrong. And that sort of helps you, if you really engage with it, helps you focus on, separate from ego and trying to win an argument, and really try and work out what's true. But of course, so I do think we should be aiming at what's true as best we can, but also the practical should never be too far away and is absolutely crucial.
Okay, so just for the sake of clarity, so now at the moment, the planet is, or the human species is facing a number of dangers, no? Some of them existential. The planet is full of nuclear weapons, for example. So between you and your co-host on your podcast, you have one set of beliefs, he has the opposite set of beliefs. Let's imagine that one of these sets of beliefs prevents humanity from going extinct, and the other one is powerless to prevent humanity from going extinct. Which one of those two options is preferable from a human perspective?
Wow, I mean, it's reminding me of Plato's discussion of the noble lie. I mean, what if there was some thing we knew to be false, right? We knew to be false, but it was going to really get people to deal with climate change. I don't know what that would be, but suppose we tell people, right, look, the aliens are gonna come and kill us all next year if we don't get down to net zero. So this has got to be done. Now, suppose that, we knew somehow, if we put that, we had the choice of putting that out on all the airways and, persuading people, and it really would be the only way of getting to net zero. Would we do it? Well, it's a difficult choice. I mean, maybe, or say, maybe if we really knew this was the only way to save the planet, maybe that's what we should do. It's like, sometimes we can imagine scenarios where, the only way to save 1,000 people is to kill an innocent child. And, you can imagine scenarios where that's what you've got to do. But I think generally it's important to just have norms where you try to get at the truth in a way that's separate from the pragmatic issues. I think that's just generally a healthier way of running society, and usually having those sort of truth conducive processes, I think, do normally get us work well pragmatically. One of the big things with climate change is, in my view, oil companies spreading disinformation or sowing seeds of doubt. So the more we can have just social structures that promote truth seeking for its own sake and guard against the power of corporations to spread misinformation, then I think that will usually be the pragmatically safest thing as well. I mean, I do happen to think cosmic purpose, the view I aim for, I think there's good reason to think it's probably true. I mean, still a lot of uncertainty here, but more likely true than false on current evidence. But I also think it's a picture of the world that does lend to a more meaningful, motivated sense of the meaning of life and existence. I mean, I basically say, well, just to sum up, I had this large discussion on cosmic purpose and human meaning, but the short story is I always reject the extremes. It's always the middle way for me. The one extreme saying there's no point to the universe, it's all meaningless and purposeless, we might as well kill each other. Some religious philosophers like William Lane Craig argue that. The other extreme is to say, no, cosmic purpose is irrelevant to our life. We can make our own meaning, and that's fine. So I have a middle way position. I do think whether or not there's cosmic purpose, we can have meaningful lives through pursuing kindness and knowledge and creativity, trying to make the world a better place. But if there is the hope of cosmic purpose, I try to argue that can lead to a more meaningful and perhaps more motivated way of living life. And I have found in my own life, for what it's worth, it has led me to be less ego focused and not still thinking that my personal commitments have importance, but seeing it as a much broader project. So I guess if you had to push me, I would probably think belief in cosmic purpose is more likely to get us to deal better with our existential crises. But that's not why I'm defending it. Ultimately, I'm saying, look, it's the view that's more likely to be true.
Well, very good. Yeah, I agree with you that your approach to goal-directedness, not only in philosophy, but more specifically in science, is a more potentially fruitful approach to getting us away from existential danger. In fact, we are lucky enough to be involved in a consortium that's doing precisely this, looking for a grant from the EU to connect various researchers who are working along these lines of a goal-oriented approach to science, from quantum physics on up through neuroscience and political theory. So I definitely agree with you there. How would you think, or what do you think most people would say about your position that I have one choice: to spare humanity from extinction and to be powerless and humans go extinct, and I don't care which choice what matters is truth? Doesn't that seem a little bit, I don't know, it seems unreasonable?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, maybe in that kind of extreme position, yeah, I'd agree with you. But then again, that's like maybe a little bit like the extreme position where you have to kill a child to save a million or something. These are extreme scenarios, and so in general, I would say we don't face that choice, and usually promoting truth conducive social structures helps with our has welcome byproducts. There's all sorts of examples of where philosophy that's just trying to get the truth on some very abstract scenario, on some very abstract question, has all sorts of incredibly useful spin-offs, Bayes' theorem itself that I talk about in the book. I hope the book is one of the most accessible introductions to Bayesian reasoning. This is the way we think about evidence and probability. But this was first, the name Bayes' theorem comes from the Reverend Thomas Bayes, who came up with this. He was a minister, a Presbyterian minister, and a couple of hundred years ago, when was Bayes? A couple of hundred years ago, something like that. And he came up with this trying to respond to David Hume's arguments against miracles. David Hume, the great Scottish philosopher, argued that for any claim about a miracle, it's always more probable that it's based on deceit or misinformation or confusion than that the laws of nature are being broken, being violated. And Bayes wanted to reply to that, and he came up with Bayes' theory, which is this incredibly useful bit of mathematics. It was very important in tracking the pandemic. There was a Guardian article on Bayes' theorem, I remember, during the pandemic. God, I've just noticed typos around that in the book. I did the audio version of the book last week, noticing all sorts of typos as I read it out loud. Anyway, and also the predictive processing paradigm in neuroscience. Also, Bertrand Russell and Frege wrestling with abstract questions about explaining mathematics in terms of logic. I think that's totally useless. But it turned out, they created the predicate logic on which computer science is so dependent. So I do think if we just go for the truth, we normally get good practical results. It's a question like, what should we, even if we didn't, it's a question like, should we give up all art that doesn't have a practical purpose? Should we give up all enjoyment? I don't know. It's, I certainly think we should spend a hell of a lot of time on these very serious existential threats, and we should take them very, very seriously. I think that's kind of compatible with art for its own sake, with some amount of philosophy for its own sake, with some amount of having a few beers to chill out, so, and I think probably people would burn out if they didn't have these alternative things. Having said that, though, I do very much respect the pragmatist view that perhaps you're pushing out, Luis, that, I'm a huge fan of William James, the great 19th century psychologist and philosopher I talk about a lot in the book, and he was very much of the pragmatist persuasion that we can't really separate truth and pragmatic importance. So I respect that position, but as I say, maybe I'm just a little bit more old school.
No, I don't think we differ. I think we're in the same position. I see your point that ultimately you don't want to accept something that's not true simply because it's not true, even if in the extreme it results in human extinction. I think there's some validity to that. Definitely, there's some validity to that. But let's push on to the goal-directedness, this concept of goal-directedness. And the second reason that I think that your book is important and this goal-directedness approach is significant. And we're probably going to disagree again, but I think that this goal-directedness approach, in the spirit of moving us beyond our differences, human differences, and getting to what we really need is to get out of this existential dilemma that we're in. The idea that there's a purpose to nature resolves the problem of evil. Because if there's a purpose to the universe, and if there is a God, big if there is a God, then it's perfectly compatible with evil. Because this person, this God, had a goal in mind, right? That goal exists in the future. It's a future where human suffering doesn't exist, animal suffering doesn't exist. It's pure bliss. So we can interpret reality as, in some sense, a kind of cosmic experiment where something like John Rawls, the very influential moral philosopher, his veil of ignorance, right? So in some sense, what we are experiencing in space and time is the result of people experimenting with an initial challenge that this God proposed. This is what I think is going to be a perfect universe. You don't have to accept it. You don't have to accept it. But if you don't, there's going to be consequences. So this is, I think it resolves the problem of evil on the one hand. It also resolves Hume's famous challenge that you can't derive an ought from an is. Because if, in fact, the purpose of life is to continue existing, then nature itself, physics and math, determines over the long term what is good and right and true by giving that which is good and right and true life and death to that which is the opposite. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, they're both very interesting points. So let me have a think about those in turn. So the problem of evil, obviously, huge debate that I have a chapter on, but obviously can't cover all possible angles. I mean, I talk a lot about Richard Swinburne, the distinguished Christian philosopher's response on the problem of evil, and he kindly reviewed it for the Times Literary Supplement, and then we had a debate on the Unbelievable YouTube channel if people are interested in those issues. It came out just last week. But yeah, so look, I mean,
may I pause very quickly? I'm sorry. May I pause very quickly?
You sure?
I agree with you. Swinburne's and any other response doesn't make sense. I agree with you there. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. However, this your approach to goal-directedness and purposiveness, I think, does potentially solve the problem of evil.
Oh, I see. So you're not defending the
No.
Omnigod, all-knowing, all-powerful. Oh, right. Okay, sure. Okay, well then we agree. Yeah. The problem of evil, as I see it, is mainly an objection to belief in the Omnigod, or knowing, all powerful, perfectly good. And so, yeah, I mean, I do think it's very difficult to reconcile the existence of a loving God who can do anything with the terrible gratuitous suffering we find in the world, particularly in the natural world. I go through some of the gruesome things we find, like the shrew that paralyzes its prey and then eats it alive over several days. Or so there's much that's really horrific, and it's hard to make sense of why a loving God who could do anything would allow those things. So I do think we have. So this is why I'm this sort of middle way position. I think traditional Christians, Jews, Muslims can't explain suffering, why God allows suffering. But I think traditional atheists can't explain the fine-tuning of physics for life, the fact that certain numbers in physics had to be just right for life against incredible odds. So we need something that can account for both of these data points. But yes, once we've dropped the Omnigod, I do think we do avoid that problem. And I do believe, yes, there is some kind of, the evidence suggests, it's all very uncertain, but the evidence suggests that there is some directedness towards the good that we can hope will continue. I mean, it's possible. It's finished now. It's possible. So I think looking back in time, I think I try to argue that cosmic purpose has pointed towards the emergence of life and conscious understanding. It could be that's the end of it, but I think once you're on board with cosmic purpose, you might think it's somewhat improbable that we happen to be living at the final culmination. So I think there's reason to think that this cosmic purpose is still unfolding, and new forms of existence will emerge as unfathomable to us as our existence is to worms, as I say in the book. So yeah, I think we're in agreement on that point. What was the second point now? I've forgotten the second point.
The second point is that if you accept the goal-directed nature of reality, then it resolves the idea that you can't derive an ought from an is.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about that. So that's a really interesting position, but I worry. I think I talk about this in the book. I'm not sure, actually. I worry that if you tried to ground value in cosmic purpose, then you might get in similar problems that occur for people who try to ground morality in God's commands. So there's a classic objection to people who say, murder is bad because God commanded us not to murder. Well, there's what's called the euthyphro dilemma, which is named because it comes up in Plato's dialogue called the euthyphro. Is it euthyphro? Euthyphro, not euthyphro.
No.
Euthyphro.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. So the idea is, well, is murder bad because God commanded it, or did God command it because God commanded us not to murder? Is murder bad because God commanded us not to do it, or is it the other way around? Did God command us not to do it because it's bad? And either way of those options seems problematic, right? If murder's bad because God commanded it, well, then it seemed like God commanded not to do it. Sorry, it seemed like God could have commanded us to murder, and then murder would have been good. It seems to make morality kind of rather arbitrary, rather dependent on God's arbitrary whims. Whereas if you say, no, God commanded us not to murder because murder's bad, well, then it looks like there's some facts about morality independent of God's commands, and so we haven't explained morality in terms of God's commands. So I worry in the same way that we'd have similar worries if we tried to explain morality in terms of cosmic purpose. I mean, we could have been in an unfortunate universe where there was some kind of goal directedness towards the bad, or towards something arbitrary, like everything being striped, I don't know, or something. I think the evidence suggests we are fortunate that the goal directedness is towards something good. And I try to suggest that the facts of goodness are somehow in some mysterious way influencing to an extent the causal evolution of the universe. Nonetheless, it's important to get it the right way around. I think things are good or bad independently of where the goal directedness happens to be pointing. Fortunately, it's pointing towards the good, but things are not good because of cosmic purpose. Things are not good because the universe is directed towards them. The universe could have been directed towards terrible things. I think facts about good and bad are independent of the cosmic purpose, the directedness of the universe. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yes, that makes sense. Although I'm having difficulty grounding it in science. Can you remind me what is the science that would back this approach?
Cosmic purpose, the reality of cosmic purpose.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, there are two arguments I give in the book. One of them is rooted in the fine-tuning of physics for life, this surprising discovery of recent decades that for life to be possible, certain numbers in physics had to fall in a certain quite narrow range. It's a surprising discovery that has emerged progressively, but largely as we did the painstaking work in the 70s and 80s, putting together the standard model of particle physics, and then that has certain fixed numbers in it we call constants that, at least as far as the theory goes, there's no rhyme or reason why they're there. They're just these basic constants, like the mass of electrons, for example. And once you've got those numbers, you can ask, well, what would the universe have been like if those numbers had been a bit different? And you can do the calculations and simulate such a universe. And as far as we've been able to map out the probability space, the chances of getting a universe where you can have life are incredibly low. So, I mean, to give a concrete example rather than continuing to waffle, perhaps the example that's most baffled cosmologists revolves around dark energy, the force that powers the accelerating expansion of the universe. If once you do the calculations, it's clear that if that number had been a little bit bigger, if that force so dark energy is the force that pushes apart the universe, if that force had been a little bit stronger, everything would have shot apart so quickly that no two particles would have ever clumped together. We'd never have stars, planets, any kind of structural complexity. Whereas if that number had been a little bit lower, if that number had been, if that force had been significantly weaker, it would not have counteracted gravity, and everything would have collapsed back on itself a split second after the Big Bang. So again, no stars, planets, life. So for life to be possible, that number had to fall in a very narrow range, like Goldilocks porridge. It had to be just right, not too strong, not too weak. And there are many numbers like this. So ultimately, I think we face a dilemma. Either it's just an incredible fluke that the numbers in our physics, these numbers in our physics are just right for life, or the numbers in our physics are as they are because they are right for life. In other words, there is some goal-directedness towards life at the fundamental level of reality in the very early universe. Now, that's weird, that's unexpected, but I think that's where the evidence is pointing, and we should try and make sense of that. And of course, there's a big discussion. There's a lot of people talk about the multiverse, which I used to think was the obvious explanation for a long time. I think there are big problems with that. Or some people appeal to the anthropic principle that, well, if we hadn't have observed these numbers, we wouldn't be here to worry about it. It's obviously true, but I don't think it makes any difference to the kind of probabilistic case based upon these numbers. So yeah, so that's one of the central planks, I think, is evidence that we are in a universe with cosmic goal-directedness. And I think future historians will look back and think, wow, it's weird that everyone just ignored that for so long, because I think that's kind of where the evidence is pointing. But it's just feels so weird to us. I think we just sort of bury our heads in the sand and ignore it.
Well, you mentioned in the book the pilot wave theory of interpretation or of quantum mechanics. And I was a little bit surprised that you didn't mention another, perhaps less well known, but I think more promising in terms of your goal-directedness approach to reality. And that's by Yakir Aharonov, the two-state vector formalism. Does that ring a bell?
I don't think it does, I'm afraid. No. Can you
Well,
tell me
this
a
is
bit
very
about that?
interesting. Yeah. What he proposes, and unlike other interpretations of quantum mechanics, this is actually not philosophy and not a mere interpretation, but has actually led to important empirical results in several different areas of physics, and it's a continuing research project. It's been very, very successful. And what he posits is two boundary conditions. In order to understand the several paradoxes and mysteries that we experience at the quantum physical level, he says what is really happening is that the past causation is coming from the past, but it's also, in some sense, coming back from the future to the present. So this future to the present aligns very nicely with this concept of goal-orientedness to reality. And I think it's a powerful way to really add a lot of oomph to your argument.
Oh, that's very interesting. I'll have to check that out. Yeah, see, I mean, you're right that that's what is distinctive about. Well, I mean, I explore a lot of. So I think there's evidence for cosmic purpose, and I explore a variety of hypotheses to try and make sense of that. And one of them is just postulating teleological laws with sort of purposes built into them. The philosopher Thomas Nagel has developed a rich account of such a possibility. And yeah, what's distinctive about teleological laws is that they work from future to past. They're not whereas we tend to think of laws of nature as working, taking past states and as inputs and spitting out future states as outputs, whereas teleological laws take us from the present moving forwards with the aim of some goal in the far future. So maybe that might fit. Yeah, I mean, so I do talk about the pilot wave theory. Not so popular, I guess. I mean, I guess I'm not a philosopher of physics, although I try and talk to physicists and philosophers of physics as as much as possible, and the book was peer reviewed by many scientists and philosophers of science. And I guess I've got a soft spot for the Bohemian view because it gets rid of all the weirdness. And people always think I'm gonna like weirdness and mystery because I'm a panpsychist. I think consciousness is everywhere. I believe in cosmic purpose. But actually, I don't like mystery. I wanna. That's why I'm obsessed with consciousness, because it's hard to get rid of the mystery. And really, I want to get rid of the mystery. I'd have the most reductionist view I could if it were possible. So I like the pilot wave view because it gets rid of all the indeterminacy and wave particle duality and so on, and superpositions and cats being neither alive nor dead. And also, it just struck me that the view I was defending in some ways fitted with the pilot wave theory, that it solved. So, on the pilot wave theory, very roughly, you've got two things. You've got the wave function, and then you've got particles, and the wave function, as it were, sort of drags around the particles. Now, one worry philosophers have is, well, this looks like particles don't do anything. They're just dragged around. And then that might be problematic if you think, well, we're made up of particles, so we're just being puppeted by the wave function. We're not really doing anything ourselves. Whereas the view I defend in the hardest chapter of the book, this is all in chapter 3 on consciousness, I defend this panagentialist view that not only consciousness but agency goes right down to the fundamental level of reality. So particles have some very, very crude form of proto-agency. Sounds insane, sounds very bizarre, but I try to make coherent sense of that and think it's empirically possible. And I think that avoids this worry with the pilot wave approach. So it fitted nicely, and that I thought it was worth, as a sort of intellectual exercise, spelling out the view panagentialism in terms of the pilot wave theory, also known as Bohmian mechanics. But it's not necessarily tied to it. So if and I know it's not too popular among physicists, people struggle to see how it could fit with quantum field theory. So, if it was decided tomorrow the pilot wave theory was definitely false, that wouldn't be a devastating objection to any of the views I defend in the book.
Well, you have a fallback, the two-state vector formalism. You've got to look that.
Yeah,
you've got to look that out. Definitely,
cool.
Definitely. Excellent.
Thanks,
Well, you put together a very compelling argument. I hope with this small brief discussion on it, we can inspire some people to actually read the book. It's quite profound. You have several levels of complexity there, and also simplicity. I love the way you offer a popular, everyday approach to topics, and then you have a digging deeper section. This is wonderful. I think people will really enjoy this quite a bit.
Thank you so much, Luis. It's been great chatting, and thanks for. We were supposed to speak yesterday, and I was hungover from drinking whiskey on my birthday, and so I'm right. Thanks for understanding and delaying another day. I'm glad we made it in the end. We're finally here.
Happy late birthday. I appreciate the time that you've
Just
given.
on that topic, Google thinks I'm 59, but I'm actually significantly younger than that. I can't work out why Google thinks I'm 59. I need to work this out. Maybe I'll just leave people thinking I use very good moisturizer for a 59.
I'm guessing the level of influence that you have on social media and your impact. I'm guessing, huh? I'm guessing.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
That's a very flattering way of interpreting it. Thank you.
Well, you've got as you know, you've got a strong presence on the internet, and that's great. You deserve it, and I think this book is going to help a lot. So 2 last questions, if it's okay.
Absolutely.
The first is, what do you suggest people do when they have differences of opinion? How to resolve them? Number 1, that's the first one, and then number 2, what's next for you and your book?
On the first one, well, this is something I'm very passionate about. I talk about this in the book. I've always been very interested in trying to get in the mindset of people who I disagree with on philosophy or politics or whatever, trying to, I find that fascinating. You think, why do they think these things? And, my own podcast, Mind Chat, I'm a panpsychist. I think consciousness is everywhere. My co-host is an illusionist who thinks in some sense consciousness is an illusion. It doesn't exist at all in a certain sense of consciousness, at least. We just try. It's been so productive trying to work out why he's thinking the things he's thinking. And you probably won't change your mind, although in some cases you will. I talk about that in the book, about how trying to seriously engage with people I disagree with has changed my view on many things, but it will give you a richer perspective on your own views. So yeah, it's so important. I never get I've got very strong political views, as come out in the book, but I never get angry with people who disagree with me. It just, people don't like talking about religion and politics, do they? But I think it's the most fun things to talk about if you can just manage to stay calm. Yeah, I need to write some academic articles. I think this term has been almost totally taken up with promoting this book and writing popular articles for Scientific American and Aeon magazine and so on. So I think after Christmas I need to get down and write some academic stuff. I've got a 3-year Templeton project on panpsychism meets panentheism. So I've defended panpsychism and philosophy of mind. I'm got this project with Andrei Bukharev in Marist College in the States, who defends panentheism, that the universe is inside God. And so we're exploring the intersection between these three views. And we had a conference in the States recently at which I did a public debate with Sean Carroll, the physicist, so people can see on YouTube if they're interested. So yeah, I'm very interested in, I'm always interested in, opening up new intellectual space, breaking the dichotomies, getting people to think of views they've rejected in a different way. And that's very much what we're trying to do with this project as well. Philosophy of religion is either very traditional Christianity or Richard Dawkins, and we're trying to open up some new possibilities. Probably the year after I'll think about another book, maybe in this same area of opening up new space in spiritual and religious thinking. And there's a lot of options. There's a lot of moves to globalize philosophy of religion and not have it so focused on Christianity, not getting rid of the Christians, but opening up more options of different global religions and different spiritual but non-religious positions. So maybe I'll write something in that area. A bit bored of consciousness now when I'm written so much about consciousness for nearly 20 years. Maybe think about sort of spirituality and this space in between Richard Dawkins and the Pope.
Okay, fantastic. For whatever it's worth, it sure would be nice to have more philosophers take the route that you've taken here, is connect the philosophy and the academics to the real world, to the political realm. Fantastic.
Yes,
well, I will
agree.
place links to your social media and to your website in the video description, and I encourage everybody to follow you and to listen to what you write and have to say.
Thanks so much, Luis. That's been a really fun conversation. If anyone, I always like to argue on Twitter, Philip_Goff. If anyone wants to have an argument on Twitter, Philip with 1 L. There's loads more stuff on my website, philipgoffphilosophy.com. But it's been a very fun conversation. Thanks again.
Likewise. Thank you.